If I were to ask you what is the most important factor behind Iran's strength today, you might say it's because of Iran's oil reserves, which has made the country powerful. But this is actually not true. Think about it. A country that was devastated by war and rebellion just 70 years ago is now challenging the world's most powerful nations. It is developing nuclear weapons and creating nuclear scientists. Behind all of this is just one person. This history is one of the world's most hidden histories. The reason for this is that no administration in Iran wants to bring forward the history of Reza Shah Pahlavi. Imagine a ruler who sat on a throne made of gold and diamonds, commanding an empire that stretched back thousands of years. He was a man who ruled with an iron fist for nearly 40 years. To his supporters, he was a visionary, a modernizer who pulled a feudal nation into the 20th century, building skyscrapers, nuclear power plants, and one of the most powerful militaries in the world. To his enemies, he was a ruthless dictator who used secret police to crush dissent. This is the story of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the last Shah of Iran. How did one man attempt to transform a traditional religious society into a technological superpower in just a single generation? And how did his obsession with rapid modernization ultimately lead to his downfall? Today, we are diving deep into the history of Iran to understand the rise and fall of the man who wanted to build a digital Iran before the digital age even began. To understand the Shah, we have to understand the Iran he inherited. When Mohammad Reza Pahlavi ascended to the throne in 1941, Iran was not the industrial giant it later became. It was occupied by Allied forces during the heat of World War II. He was young, only 21 years old, and many world leaders viewed him as weak, a puppet caught in the middle of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West. But the young Shah had a different vision. He didn't just want to rule Iran, he wanted to transform it. He looked at the advanced nations of Europe and America and decided that Iran belonged at that same table. His true consolidation of power began after the tumultuous events of 1953. This is a crucial moment in the history of the Middle East. After a CIA-backed coup known as Operation Ajax removed the democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, the Shah returned to power with absolute authority. With his throne secure, he launched one of the most ambitious social and economic programs in history. He called it the White Revolution. The White Revolution, launched in 1963, was not a revolution of blood and fire, but a revolution of reform and technology. The Shah wanted to break the old feudal systems that had held Iran back for centuries. His most aggressive move was land reform. For generations, massive amounts of Iranian land were owned by a tiny group of wealthy aristocrats and religious foundations. The Shah forced these landowners to sell their land to the government, which then redistributed it to millions of poor farmers. Overnight, a feudal state began to look like a modern economy. But his vision went far beyond farming. He was obsessed with education and technology. In the 1960s, Iran had high illiteracy rates. The Shah created the Literacy Corps. This was a brilliant military-style program where young, educated Iranians, instead of serving in the army with guns, were sent to remote villages to teach people how to read and write. The results were staggering. Illiteracy rates skyrocketed. He poured money into building thousands of schools and universities, sending tens of thousands of Iranian students to the best colleges in America and Europe. He wanted a generation of engineers, doctors, and scientists who could build a great civilization. This is where we see the seeds of what you might call a digital Iran. The Shah was fascinated by the future. He invested heavily in telecommunications, connecting remote parts of the country with telephone lines and television broadcasts. He modernized the bureaucracy, using early computer systems to manage the growing state. He famously said he wanted Iran to be the Japan of the Middle East. He didn't just want to sell oil, he wanted to produce steel, cars, and electronics. By the 1970s, Iran was manufacturing automobiles, expanding its petrochemical industry, and even planning a massive network of nuclear power plants to generate electricity, arguing that oil was too valuable to burn. Then came the oil boom of the 1970s. When global oil prices quadrupled, Iran was suddenly swimming in petrodollars. The Shah's ambition went into overdrive. He went on a spending spree that the world had rarely seen. He bought the most advanced American military technology available, including the F-14 Tomcat fighter jets, the only country besides the US to operate them. He built massive dams, highways, and hospitals. Tehran began to look like a modern Western metropolis, filled with fashion, art, and cinema. The economy grew at an explosive rate, sometimes exceeding 10% per year. Iran became a major player in global geopolitics, guarding the Persian Gulf and ensuring the flow of energy to the world. Socially, the transformation was equally radical. The Shah granted women the right to vote and hold public office. He appointed the first female judges and ministers in Iran's history. The family protection law was passed, giving women more rights in marriage and divorce. Walking through the streets of Tehran in the 1970s, you would see women in miniskirts walking alongside women in chadors. It was a society in rapid transition, trying to bridge the gap between ancient Persia and the modern West in the blink of an eye. However, this story has a dark side. You cannot talk about the Pahlavi dynasty without talking about repression. While the Shah was building a modern economy, he was also building a police state. He established Savak, a secret police force trained by the CIA and the Mossad. Savak was notorious for its brutality. The Shah had zero tolerance for political dissent. He believed that he knew what was best for Iran and that democracy would only slow him down. He banned independent political parties and eventually declared a one-party state. This created a dangerous paradox. The Shah was giving people economic opportunities and education, but he was denying them political freedom. As the middle class grew, thanks to his own reforms, they began to demand a voice in how the country was run. But the Shah refused to listen. He became increasingly isolated, surrounded by yes-men who were afraid to tell him the truth. Furthermore, the speed of his modernization created a massive cultural backlash. The Shah was moving too fast for the traditional sectors of society. By enforcing secularism and pushing Western culture, he alienated the powerful Shia clergy. The rapid urbanization forced millions of peasants into cities where they felt lost and culturally displaced. Inflation spiked, and the gap between the ultra-rich elite and the working class became a canyon. The very people he was trying to modernize began to see him not as a savior, but as a tyrant who was selling Iran's soul to the West. The tragedy of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is that he succeeded in building the hardware of a modern nation, the roads, the factories, the weapons, and the schools, but he failed to build the software, the political institutions and social trust needed to sustain it. He wanted a technological Iran, but he ruled it like an ancient king. By late 1978, the streets that the Shah had paved were filled with millions of protesters calling for his death. The alliance of leftist intellectuals, students, and religious traditionalists, groups that usually hated each other, united against him. The Iranian Revolution had begun.
In January 1979, the man who dreamed of a great civilization boarded a plane and left Iran, never to return. He died in exile just over a year later, watching his life's work be dismantled and transformed into the Islamic Republic. Today, the legacy of Mohammad Reza Pahlavi is a subject of intense debate. Some look back at the Pahlavi era with nostalgia, remembering it as a time of wealth, secularism, and global respect. Others view him as a cautionary tale of what happens when a leader forces progress from the top down without the consent of the people. History is rarely black and white. The Shah was a dictator, yes, but he was also a modernizer who aggressively pushed his country forward. His attempts to create a high-tech industrial Iran changed the Middle East forever. Whether his vision was a dream or a hallucination depends on who you ask, but the impact of his 40-year rule is undeniable. If you enjoy beautifully told history documentaries and powerful true stories in a concise format, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps this channel grow, and I'd truly love to hear your valuable thoughts in the comments below.